Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we have something super fun in store for us. Today we're going to the Pioneer Living History Museum just outside of Phoenix. This is going to be super fun and something kind of to throw us back into the past and give us some brain wrinkles about what it was like to live in a time that was a bit more simple and hard at the same time. Let's go. Okay, we just came outside after a brief walkthrough of what to expect, and they gave us this map. You can see there are several different structures on here, and we're going to go explore a lot of these. Now, a few things before we do. The cost of admission for adults is $12, and that gives you access to explore during the times that they're open. Now, they do have different hours based on what day that you're here, so make sure that you check that out. And they do special presentations also, where they do reenactments, or they have people out here exhibiting skills and crafts. So there's a lot of different experiences you can have at this one property. Not to mention, there is actually a telephone history museum that I kind of briefly went through. These are some of the things that you can find there, but I'm going to leave that one for you guys because I think you'll enjoy the history there. And even though some of it is older, some of it is more modern, so I did want to separate that from this particular video. But now it's time for us to go and do the fun stuff. We're going to get out here and explore the property and check out some of these historic structures and also see what little bits of history we can kind of glean from this. I'm so excited, and I hope you guys are too. Upon entering this location, you go through a brief introduction to the property, including the bar that you walk through. Now, that thing is epic, and as you can see here, it is absolutely gorgeous. It took it a long run to get to this location though, and in fact they had to build the building that it sits in specifically for it because it is so large. But that actually used to have a home in several other places, including Jerome right here in Arizona. But all of the different buildings that we're seeing on site are either reproductions of the originals that they had in various locations, or they have been relocated to this location. So you're seeing a lot of really cool bits of history just walking around and seeing the outer structures. But let's go into these and kind of see some of the little details that they've also included for us to get those little brain wrinkles. I am so excited about this. I love a good history museum. As soon as we walk in, it's a smaller room, and then it leads to a much darker room, which I believe is like an auditorium. Let's go see. In fact, it is. They do put on programs here, again, various times throughout the year. This looks like it's set up for one of those. And so you can come in here, and it's pretty thunderous, the echo, without all of the seating, but it's really neat to be able to see this. Something else pretty neat is around the property you'll find various historic photos, and you'll be able to put together the pieces of the puzzle. So right here we have an advertisement for a skating rink, and this is the Howie building. You could come there between 7:30 and 10 on the afternoons or evenings, or 2 to 4, and it was 25 cents for admission and 25 cents per hour for skating rentals also. But then you could go over here and see what the different properties actually looked like right here, and I think that that's really, really neat. Not to mention, it has a little bit more information on there about the overall picture, which is really cool and puts this building into such a different perspective. But then here we find a small plaque about the Opera House, which is what we're actually in. Now, this place was once called Howie's Hall, and it was actually located in the Prescott area, and this is a reconstructed building using original materials. So in place of the items that they didn't have, they would supplement them with things that they could find that would continue to keep the historic preservation, but also the safety in mind. And so you can read a little bit more about that right here, but there's some other cool information that I definitely want to share with you. Now, believe it or not, the guy who is responsible for this building is named James Howie. And originally he was a blacksmith, but somehow along the line he ended up building this monstrosity of a building that was huge and could be used as a place for opera and shows and things like that. And it really thrived for a good portion of time until finally in 1881 he had to put it up for auction. Now, a lot of times when we come to places like this and we just see the shell of building, we think, okay, well, that's cool. Yay, I saw that. That was fun. I don't want to do that again. But it's the stuff that happens behind the scenes before it gets here that really brings it into perspective as to why it is here. In fact, this particular building, the very one that has that really cool stage in the front and has this nice grand area to open up, actually has served as a grocery store. It has served as a militia point at one point where they would house the militia. It has served as a theater. There's been so many different things that have happened, including that skating rink that we saw just a while ago. And so that's why buildings like these are important, because they're part of the community in various points. Now, they might start out as a single-use building, but over time, that building may become a different kind of memory for the next generation, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. In fact, this building alone stood as a part of the community until 1959, when it was originally relocated to this location and now is starting to teach others through the legacy here at the Pioneer Museum. And so I think that that's also really cool. All the life that it had before, and now it lives to teach others, and then also to have special programs and things like that. So that sets the kind of context for where we're going with this, and I hope you'll keep coming along, because we have some really cool stuff to see. Now, in addition to the super cool things that I've seen already, apparently they have a gunfight reenactment sometimes, so that's kind of cool. And they have a whole Western scene that they have set up just for that. Now, you might notice that there's someone walking over here. I think that's Aussie Van Man. Let's go catch up with him, because he's been here now 4 times and he has something he wants to show us. Okay, so Brock, you've been here, this is your 4th time, right?
Correct.
So you've been here and you've seen this and you kind of have the lay of the land. Where are we going next?
Next we're going down to these old houses here. Some of them were actually relocated to this site in their original built homes, so actually have some history.
Very cool. Lead the way. Okay guys, it looks like we are starting off with the Merritt Farm. So as we walk down this little dusty path, it takes us through this little grove of cacti and interesting plants and beautiful flowers because of all the rain that we've been having. It's quite nice out here, and I can definitely see why this would be a popular stop, because you can see a lot of historic structures fully intact, and I am just in awe. In fact, we've just arrived at the Merritt Farm, and already I see this structure right here, this really tall saguaro cactus, and then a few outbuildings, but then there's the main house, and it looks spectacularly preserved. Now, the Merritt farmhouse was originally built around 1890, and it was actually relocated here from the Glendale area. It sat on a 100-acre farm, and this farm was built shortly after the completion of the Arizona Canal in 1885 that brought the much-needed water all the way over to Glendale from the Phoenix area and from some of the area lakes and streams. The family that lived in this home, John and Emma Merritt, actually moved to Arizona from their home in Nevada, Missouri, because their sons Glenn and Melvin had tuberculosis. The parents felt that the Arizona dry, sunny climate would actually be beneficial to their boys' health. Okay, a couple pieces of information that we've kind of gathered from place to place, because all places ultimately are connected in some way. This is called a breezeway or a dog run, depending on where you're at. This would allow air to push through in this section so that they could actually sit outside and create kind of a breeze. A lot of structures in this time also had large covered porches, because this would be the only way that they could get a retreat from the heat, because just over here it's blasting blasting down sun, but here it feels very nice. Houses at this time did not have air conditioners, so it was super important for them to have windows in every room so that they could open them, so that they could get a nice pass through of air also, especially in the desertous areas. So we're seeing a lot of that with some of the old original leaded glass. Some of it looks like it's probably been replaced, but then Brock pointed out this. This is actually the kitchen. Notice that the kitchen is separate from the main house, and that would be because they wouldn't want the heat to come from the kitchen and move into the house itself. And so a lot of times in homes that have this particular setup, they would actually have an outdoor setup also for eating the food so that they can come directly out of the kitchen and to the porch area. And so it's kind of interesting. There's a little place that we can walk over here to get a look inside, so let's go check it out. Okay, he's walking down, but we can see in these windows right here, and the closer that we get, the more you can kind of see what a kitchen of the time would have looked like. Much different than the kitchens that we're used to now, because again, it's a separate room, but it does have a few of the things that would be modern conveniences. They do have a sink over there. It looks like they have a pump also for water, so that's kind of different that they have both the knobs and the pump. But yeah, this is what the kitchen looked like. Oh my goodness, it appears that Brock has found actual critters. They have real critters out here, guys. I did not know this. What do we have, Brock? What do we have?
These would be flightless birds of prey.
Oh, you mean chickens?
I mean, you could call them chickens.
Interesting. Hi guys, how are you all? Amongst this field of beautiful flowers, the bathroom. Bathroom was not attached to the interior of the home in most of these early structures, and they had outhouses like this. Now, I am a considerable distance away from the outhouse, and this is as close as I'm going to get because I have seen some really gross things, even in outhouses that have been set up for display. And this one seems to have a nice fence on it so that nobody can go in there and do weird things, and I'm really happy about that. But still, we're going to keep our distance just in case. Now, I can see from here, it looks like there's a short hole and a tall hole, so that means it was probably a kid's toilet versus an adult toilet. The hole is smaller on the kids than the adults, so the kid wouldn't fall inside. And you know, it just isn't my ideal thought of how I want to go to the bathroom in a big stinky box in the summer heat. But that was reality at the time. So I'm really thankful for indoor plumbing. And even though I travel in a van and a lot of people look at me like, how do you go to the restroom? And they might not necessarily always love the more primitive methods for van life, it sure beats this. It looks like we found the next house that we're going to go visit. This one is really nice also. This one does look in a little bit worse for wear condition from the last one. The porch is slightly sagging on the side, but we're going to go take a peek inside and see if we can figure out who lived here. Now this is in fact the Victorian house, and it was built in the early 1890s on an 80-acre homestead in Phoenix. It was originally acquired by John Marion Sears, and it was located at 4032 North 7th Street in Phoenix, which looks a lot different than this now, let me tell you. Now, before Phoenix was developed into a railroad connection in 1887, transporting lumber was dependent on an extensive freight wagon shipping. Therefore, most buildings in the Phoenix area were built out of adobe bricks. But when the railroad made shipping of lumber more affordable, there was a boom in building, and this house was amongst one of the earliest totally wooden frame homes in the Phoenix area. Now, because of that history, they wanted to preserve it, and it was so close. They made it within 30 days of its scheduled demolition before it was actually donated to the museum, and the museum was able to get up together the money to actually move it off of the structure so it wouldn't be demolished. But this is, again, one of the earliest pieces of Phoenix history right here for architecture that was made out of wood. And so it's really cool to be able to see it. And even though it is a little bit worse for wear, being able to look inside this place, it's like a time capsule of beauty and amazement. So I definitely am happy that we were able to see this, especially considering how sprawling and abundant homes are now in the Phoenix area. This was not only early on into that, but also a pioneer. Now, as we enjoy a nice shade retreat out here, Brock actually said that some of the fields here are used for the reenactments. Brock, did they use this one ever?
Yeah, this is where they have the Civil War reenactments. spots right here.
Very cool. So if you are interested in finding out a little bit more about this, you can check out their schedule on their website and find out a little bit more about when they do reenactments or special programs. I highly recommend that. But now, so we've cooled off, it's time for us to go and find another building. Let's go. This building behind us is probably going to be on the top of my list because it has a tie to me personally. Now, if you've watched my channel for very long, you already know I used to work in newsprint, and I still do work in news. And so whenever I get to see a print shop showing how it's done, it's just really, really cool because I've actually been to an old school printer who still prints using the old printing techniques and preserves that piece of history. And so it really makes me geek out. But let's go see what's inside. Now, inside of this building, which happens to be a replica of an 1890 building that was actually located in Phoenix, there is an operating press that was typically used by the Arizona territorial newspapers. And here you could find most of the things that would be in shops like these, including all of the different things that they might have printed, like newspapers and handbills, calling cards, invitations, posters, or other printing things. And you'll also find, in addition to a C&P pilot press, a C&P 10x5 press, and an additional press with numerous other kinds of artifacts. Now, the cool thing about when you go into a printing shop is you can still smell the old ink. It just has a very distinct smell to it. You smell it every time you walk into one, and it's a very cool experience. With so many things that are now digital, it's kind of sad to see places like these as a historic relic because they're a thing that delivered so many different things to people to keep them knowledgeable about what was going on at the time. And it was very important to have a newspaper in your area to convey those things to people. You would find out some of the most relevant stories, or who was wanted, or what specials were running at the grocery store. And it was something that was like a life fuel. And even though they do still have newspapers, more often than not now people are going toward digital media. So these places are awesome for seeing where it all began. And now we find ourselves at the dress shop, and the dress shop is a pretty large building. So let's take a look inside. Patrons of the dress shop were usually upper-class women who could afford custom-made clothing. They used a lot of satins and silks, and it cost anywhere between 30 and 50 cents a yard. And typically a Victorian dress was made of 7 to 9 yards of fabric, so that could be quite costly. To put it into perspective, a seamstress would have to work for 60 hours and only make approximately 54 cents. Now, this particular building is also a reproduction building, but they do have some historic photos right here, so you can see what some of the women of the time would have actually looked like wearing the garments that they would have been able to purchase here. So that's really cool too. There's something else down here. I don't know if we can see into it or not. It looks like they've got this one closed off, but it's attached to the dress building. So maybe this is one of those things that's open seasonally or whenever they're having special demos. I don't know. If you've been here before, let me know what's inside this building, because there are no clues. Now, down this path, it does look like they have a couple of more historic structures, but they're currently working on that area, so they do have it closed off. So I'm very interested to find out a little bit more about that potentially by looking online. And I definitely encourage you guys to, if you're exploring and you find something that you're super interested in that just captivates your mind, after you leave the place, pull it up on Google, do some deep diving, learn a little bit more, and continue the brain wrinkles. The adventure itself is only part of the brain wrinkle. It inspires you, it gets you going, it motivates you to go and see more. But it's what we do with that knowledge after that's super important. And that's why a lot of times whenever I leave a place like this, I like to go on the deep dive to learn a little bit more so I can put everything into context. And I encourage you guys to do that too. But for now, we have some other things to see. Let's get going. Okay, you guys are probably not able to see this as well, but we're having to kind of go off of the sidewalks because in order to get up to the upper structures, you kind of have to take these paths, which is fine. Except there's been lots of rain, so everything is grown up. So Brock is being our scout for snakes today. They did say that it is snake season and to be very vigilant about watching pretty much everything. So if you are coming out here and it's during the snaky time, you know, bring good shoes. Bring good shoes and kind of have an exit strategy. And yeah, it's a real thing, guys. They have signs like this everywhere. Yeah. No, no, no. With that said, it is worth it to come up here because they have a lot of really cool like mining artifacts up here. So you get to see a lot of the old carts, the actual like pull lines where they would pull them in and out, and some of the other tools also. It's pretty interesting. Looking forward to seeing what's kind of ahead of us though. This is cool. Okay, this is what it would look like as it goes into one of the mine shafts. Now this is just a mock-up mine shaft to kind of show us what it would look like on the side of the mountain, but around both Nevada and Arizona, not to mention California too, I've seen several places that look exactly like this, and then there's a hole that just cast into the ground. Most of them have been plugged, however, some of them have not. So if you ever see something like this, do not go in. They also have one of the lifts that would bring people in and out, and then it also would bring out other things. So I learned that the guy who operated this actually would only operate off of a series of bells. Up at the top, they would ring a bell, and based on how many times they would ring that, the guy who would operate this would know if there was a person, or if there were goods, or how fast or how slow it needed to go up. So this was a guy's job all day for an entire shift, just waiting to hear the bells. Now looking inside this might be what the miners would live in or stay in while they were working. And you can find a variety of different things. Now I learned at one of my previous stops that shacks like this, depending on what you find in them, it would tell you who lives there. So looking inside here, it looks like there's probably just a single individual, probably a man because there's a woman's painting up on the wall, so that would be like his pinup. And then the things inside are very basic and they don't look like they have a lot of frills, so this would probably be a necessity cabin only. So you can find tools in here, you can find basic items, but this definitely looks like a man lived here. You can also see that there's a variety of different liquors and shaving kits and things like that inside, so definitely a man would have lived in this one right here. Now up on occasion you'll also find one that looks like a family might live there, but most of the time in these particular mining villages the men would come out first. They would try to make their claim on fame and fortune. If it worked out, then they would move the family out, or they would meet somebody along the way and then they would end up getting hitched and then move in together. But most of the women's homes that I found at the various points were women who worked in the community or women who were women of the night. Just an interesting little fact that we've seen over our now dozens of different mining sites that we've been to. But with that said, we're going to go back down the mountain and I think I see a church. It looks like a church. It's very tall in stature. It's beautiful and I'm really excited about that one. Let's go. Again, keeping diligent, looking in both directions. The flowers are pretty, but the snakes are not, and apparently the snakes in this particular area are black and yellow. As you guys can see, we made it down to the church and yes, it is beautiful. But I think we can actually go up to the door. We might even be able to walk in this one. I'm not sure. We're about to find out. Now this community church was a replica of St. Paul's Methodist Episcopal Church, which was around between 1880 and 1927 in Globe, Arizona. The first minister to ever grace this church was Reverend John Winger, and he actually brought his family to the Arizona Territory from Kansas by covered wagon in 1876. The next year, he would walk 35 miles every week to provide worship for the area and to officiate, and also to run the newspaper office. By the 1880s, the congregation raised funds to officially build the church, and this was the church that they built. Now the cool thing about this is the original bell was actually called God's Alarm, and so that is something that's really neat about this particular church that's a little different than some of the others. This is different. A teacherage. Now it looks like inside here we have another cabin, and I'm assuming this means that this would have been where the teacher or maybe the preacher would have stayed. Usually they call the ones preachers stay in a parsonage, so maybe a teacherage is where a teacher would stay. That would make sense. Now this tiny cabin is very tiny. It's a one-room cabin. They had everything that they needed in that one space, and it does have a few feminine touches. Most of the teachers at the time were all women, and they would move to an area basically on a contract that they would provide all sorts of things for the school, but then a lot of times as a result they would be given a place to stay. And so this would make sense if it was a teacher who lived here. It looks like behind the cabin they have a little well area, and then there's this nice outdoor space for you to come and sit, and it looks like they might do some programs out here as well. And then there's a cabin right here. Let's go check that one out. The building that was in fact behind the cabin is a schoolhouse, which leads me to believe that that definitely was a place where a teacher would have stayed. Now this is an original schoolhouse that was relocated from Gordon Canyon, and the Gordon Canyon schoolhouse was located 30 miles east of the Payson area, and the building was first a home to William and Elizabeth Gordon and their children. And then in 1880, when the family grew too large for the house, the cabin was then converted to a one-room schoolhouse. We are now following Brock over to the Pioneer Cemetery. Okay, you're probably saying, a cemetery? I thought this was an attraction. Well, it is, but it isn't. Every Wild West town has a cemetery. So here we're gonna find a few stones that have some interesting messages, but the point is that every pioneer area would have had a cemetery. Okay, so along this area you'll find several different stones, but you might notice that these are not your average stones for a pioneer cemetery. These are a little different. They're shaped maybe like those, however you'll notice that the dates are much more recent on here. So I'm not exactly sure of the entire story of these, but I do know that these are not old pioneer graves right here. It is pretty interesting to see though, and to read the little independent epitaphs on each one of them. I encourage you guys to stop here, and again, I don't know enough context on this to know if these are actual people buried here or if this is like a ceremonial, like honorary thing. I'm not sure, but it does have actual people on the stones. These aren't spoof stones. So it's very interesting. Now this one is considered to be the northern home, which is an example of saddle and rider notching techniques, which was an original structure that was moved here all the way from Newman Canyon. Now Newman Canyon is about 25 miles southeast of Flagstaff, so this building has come a long way to be with us today. At one point in time, the homeowner, Jeff D. Newman, who arrived in Arizona prior to 1886 with his family, including his wife and 3 sons and 5 daughters, all managed to live in this one home. And it's pretty interesting to see inside, as you can see. Now, originally the loft that is seen on this cabin was not looking quite like it does now. It was actually extended to the entire length of the building. It was only acceptable for loft storage, and you would have to actually use some version of cleats to get up there in order to get in, because the access to the loft would have been minimal at best. Snow would have been blowing through the eaves during the winter. Following the rock wall around, we finally arrived to this area, which is a ranch complex. There's a couple little outbuildings here, and as you can see, Brock is right ahead of us, so let's go check out what he's finding. Okay, we just have a small ranch home. You can see the fireplace. That would have been a central piece of all homes, just because that would have been not only how they cook, but also how they get their heat. Now, on the opposite side, it does say that this is an original cabin, and it was from approximately the 1870s. You can see here that they've put in a bed, which would be a rope frame bed, and then they have a few other things, including some little sifting things that they might have panned for gold with. Now in the back, it looks like they have both a spring house and also a root cellar, which would have been very common for cabins like these. A lot of times in order to get their water, they would have found an area that could have been by running water or that might have had a fresh spring nearby. And so that's what that little building would have been. The spring house was also used as a refrigerator of the time. Okay, behind us we have another original structure. Now, a story behind this one. This one actually belongs to a person who was a senator here in the state of Arizona. This was their boyhood home, and it was approximately 1878 whenever it was originally built. However, at one point it was kind of abandoned, and whenever it was, the snow made it come crashing down, and so they were able to reassemble it using the parts that they had available, and they were able to bring it here and show what it might have looked like based on the recollections of the senator. So as we look inside, you can see that, and you can see the various pieces that might have been included. Now, this is a longer kind of cabin than some of them that we've seen, but at the same time, still very small. By today's standards, a home for multiple people to live inside, this thing is a tiny home. It's a tiny, tiny home. Now, just ahead of us, Brock is actually at a cabin that he said was a place that had a real life shootout happen. So let's go check that out. Now, according to what he was telling me, there's actually spaces where you could see the shotguns could come out the side of the door. And that is crazy. And also throughout the walls. So that's real crazy. Oh wow, guys, this one looks like it's being held up by the scaffolding potentially, and that it's not in great shape, which explains why we can't really visually see inside of it. Now guys, this is the Flying V cabin, and he was telling me about these little holes. Now this is where they could have stuck guns out, but there's also a few like other areas where you could see that there's holes now, but there are very distinct cuts in the area that they would have used for the guns. There's another one of those holes. As you can see, it's clearly cut out of the side so that they could put the guns out. Okay, so there was no sign for context, so we went looking, and one of my favorite sites, Atlas Obscura, actually has a really nice write-up. If you guys are looking for interesting places to go, always check Atlas Obscura, because places like this are actually on there. So as we kind of go down a little bit more, we learned that this is a rustic cabin. It was outfitted with gun slits, and it was once the home of John D. Tewksbury. Okay, that's cool, but this part, he was the patriarch of the bloodiest family feud in American history. What? So as you kind of go down on this, it not only gives you information about where this attraction is, but if you're on Atlas Obscura, you also get this wonderful piece of history that tells you a little bit more about the cabin that is in front of us and how it doesn't have windows. And if you look at it closer, you see those small slits. But it also tells us about when it was moved here and also the reason why it was moved here. This was the bloodiest family feud in U.S. history, and it even surpasses the Hatfields and McCoys. By the end of the battle, nearly every male on both families was dead. You never know what you're going to find whenever you come to a random place like this. You could find a really cool brain wrinkle, you could find a piece of cool history, or you could find a piece of a bloodbath that is memorializing something really crazy that happened that we don't really hear about, because realistically I've heard about the Hatfields and McCoys, but I had never heard about this particular family feud, and now I'm interested to see if they've made kind of a documentary or a movie about it. They have to have, right? So this is what I'm going to be doing whenever I leave here. Now, after checking out the cabin with the worst family feud, we come to this section, and there's the gallows and sheriff's department right there. So we see both of these things. Now, as many of you know, in the Wild West, if you were a horse thief, you might be hanged. If you had robbed a bank, you might be hanged. If you had done something that they considered unsavory, this was the method of choice for delivering the death penalty at that time. Now, the sheriff's office is a reconstruction of an 1881 adobe building, and you can see the adobe up close. It's very fascinating to see how it uses straw and mud to secure the outer portions of this building. Again, wood was scarce in this area, so it was harder for them to find the resources to bring wood in, so a lot of buildings were made of this. However, it also made buildings stronger and cooler, so it's a very interesting building in itself. But the thick clay and then also straw and sand made it easier for them to keep inhabitants in here while they were locked up, so they wouldn't be in conditions that were considered inhumane. Okay guys, as we come into this building, we see the tellers, and there's a few other items in here that are kind of interesting. It seems as though they have a collection of antique typewriters in here, which is kind of neat. They also have just behind the counter a bunch of different ledgers and some of the other things that might have been used at a bank, including like fans and then also some different like 9-key things. It's really neat to see kind of what that they curate to put in each one of these displays, because these are artifacts from the past being preserved, but also you can see the architectural elements that are just really nice, very detailed, very different than the modern look of our banks today. Now, just past the teller windows, we have this little setup here that would have been like the branch manager probably. He's sitting here, he has all of the access to the ledgers, he can go through and check things. You also have a couple of coin bags out, so he would probably be responsible for making sure everything was accounted for each day. And then of course, here is the big safe. So everything would be behind this closed door. And as you can see, there's a couple different mechanisms on this. This was an early safe, but a lot of these safes still to this day are being used in some of our historic banks, believe it or not. It's kind of crazy because they were just built to last. So this is kind of an interesting setup to see. Okay guys, that's going to do it for us here at the Pioneer Museum. I've had a really good time exploring history with you guys and getting some new brain wrinkles. Places like this are great because you can find locations that talk about history throughout the United States. And I encourage you to deep dive into the areas around you to learn a little bit more because, well, as I always say, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time. Till next time guys, bye!